In every universe, something resists death. Some call it survival. The Foundation calls it contamination. There was a time when death was considered a law, as absolute as gravity, as impersonal as light. Everything decayed, everything cooled, everything forgot. Entropy was not an enemy, it was the only constant mercy. But something changed. Somewhere in the controlled silence of the Foundation's archives, the numbers stopped behaving. The corpses did not stay inert, the minds did not stay silent. Machines, once obedient to shutdown commands, began to hum again. Within the secured servers of Site-19, 3 files began rewriting themselves: 682, 1440, and 963, 3 anomalies that independently should have been impossible. And yet their signatures began to overlap, like 3 frequencies merging into one unbearable note. The Foundation calls this convergence the Immortality Paradox, a pattern of defiance that exists not in biology, but in the very code of causality. A creature that refuses extinction, a man who flees from life itself, and a mind that refuses to end, wearing death as an accessory. Together, they do not challenge mortality, they erase its meaning. This is not a story of monsters. It is a record of the moment when humanity's most sacred truth, that all things end, began to fracture. And as the Foundation's attempts to study, contain and forget them multiply, one truth becomes clear. Death is not losing its power. It is being rewritten. The file you are about to hear is incomplete. Several sections were removed at the request of the O5 Council. What remains has been reconstructed from partial data logs, recovered terminals, and the memories of personnel who no longer exist. Static, a faint heartbeat, then silence. The first record does not look like a beginning. It looks like a mistake in weather. A floodplain at the edge of an industrial corridor, under a sky the color of cold steel, receives more water than the ground knows how to drink. Runoff carries solvents and history. It pools in a gravel pit, where the wind fails to move the surface. For a time the water behaves, then it doesn't. Witnesses describe it as a shiver in the mirror. Local law enforcement files it as contamination. The Foundation calls it an opportunity and deploys under a false EPA banner that fits like a borrowed name. At 0412, the first agent on site notes an odor not congruent with petrochemical spill, salt, iron, something like whetstone and hot electronics. At 0413, Geiger counters remain docile. Thermal sensors report a heat bloom without a source. At 0414, the water makes room for a shape. The shape does not arrive. It remembers itself into being. A spine assembles as if called to attention. Cartilage drafts itself, erases, tries again. Plates appear along a dorsal ridge, not grown so much as selected from a library. A mouth forms without deciding on a species. The air cools, the light tilts. The men and women watching, disciplined into stillness by training and by fear, record their first measurements and discover that the decimals return different answers depending on which hand writes them. At 0419, camera A5's lens fogs from the inside. At 0420, the waterline drops without evaporation. The shape takes a breath that sounds like a signature being practiced. Recovery proceeds according to doctrine. Doctrine is a ritual whose power relies on not believing in power. A perimeter establishes itself. Unmarked trucks translate the shape from the world into the Foundation's grammar. The container is neutral gray. The straps are rated beyond the failure point of optimism. The tranquilizer is a species of mercy the Foundation manufactures in-house. The shape, later, SCP-682, accepts none of it. Field Log 682 contains a line item labeled Biomass Compliance Partial. The needles enter flesh that actively decides what to be. The sedative passes through tissue that treats it as weather. A respiratory rate falls, a threat profile rises. In the rear of the transport, a junior tech watches the pulse through a plexiglass aperture and realizes that the space between each beat feels like attention. At Site 19, The air is colder by mandate. The corridors speak in the common tongue of fluorescent light. The first containment chamber is a standard tank built for a patient the Foundation has not yet met. No chamber is standard after that. Initial measurements express the creature as if it were a fact. Length variable, mass defiant, dermal composition, keratinized plate with interspersed mineralization. Microscopic analysis reveals a crystalline scaffold that does not repeat or repeats in a way that mathematics refuses to admit. Dentition, mutable, eyes present, then otherwise. Behavior, observational, spiteful, almost amused, a term removed in later revisions as unprofessional and true. The first termination attempt is scheduled because procedure demands hard lines where reality blurs. At 1940, the tank fills with an acid whose recipe reads like a confession. At 1941, bubbles rise with the solemnity of prayer. At 1942, fibers that should surrender elongate, not convert. The entity's flesh demonstrates an argument against dissolution by becoming a map of the forces trying to erase it. Audio 682-1 captures the room. There is the constant mechanical breath of the building. There are voices speaking in the tense shorthand of professionals aware of being recorded. There is a sound no instrument thinks to expect. Not a scream, not a growl, but a recall, like a tape spool spun backward until a word is about to be recognized, and then isn't. At 1943, the first phrase enters the file, unapproved. It appears in a telemetry margin, as if the system chose its own place to write. You cannot kill what was never meant to end. The phrase propagates to a second monitor, then disappears under the corrective white of protocol. The tech responsible will later insist the text was only in his mind. The system logs disagree. Termination attempt terminates nothing. The acid cools around a shape that reconsiders itself in small ways. Plate density adjusted, joint range recalculated, dermal angles reoriented to deny purchase to anything like fate. The Foundation states, in language that has learned to hide its throat, that neutralization proved non-viable at this time. The second attempt is less theatrical. Heat, pressure, vacuum applied in symmetrical increments. The entity adjusts. Its cells perform apoptosis, where apoptosis benefits integrity, and decline where death would be redundant. It uses the lab's intent as scaffolding. Every incision becomes annotation. Every protocol educates. Recovered photograph 682-3 shows the entity under a blue-white glare, eyes obscured by the reflection of light that never reflects in that pattern again. Dust floats in the beam, like an uncountable population of possibilities. No human silhouette appears in the glass. The camera confirms it was present. Later, someone will note that the angle precludes reflection. This will not help them sleep. Witness statement, redacted, collected under amnestics retrograde, and then paradoxically preserved, describes the sensation of standing next to the tank, as standing beside a story that refuses its last chapter. The witness remembers the taste of halogen and the sound of their own pulse, as an instrument trying to lock onto a signal drifting under the floor. The transport manifest cites the entity as cargo until mid-paragraph, where the noun quietly shifts to subject, then slips once to patient and once to instructor. The line editor marks the shifts in red and moves on. The marks remain visible to anyone who knows what to look for. The Foundation's lexicon hardens around the designation. The designation hardens around the myth. SCP-682, hard to destroy reptile. The label is conservative to the point of dishonesty. Inside containment, something learns what the word hard means when spoken by a species that writes endpoints into calendars. 3 more files accrue under the heading, Recovered Materials. The Foundation learns as well, though what it learns is not immediately useful. It learns that attempting to classify this persistence makes the classification a lesson plan. It learns that watching becomes collaboration when survival uses observation as substrate. It learns that there are edges to its own belief in endings, a belief it maintains to keep the doors closed and the lights on, and the public asleep. An addendum appears after the first week. Cross-testing, not recommended pending further review. The recommendation expires into authorized if supervised by O5. The authorization migrates to a locked queue, where curiosity goes to wait until it learns to sound like necessity. The recovered witnesses do not remember the details that would injure them. They remember enough to dream. They report in exit interviews, a corridor that repeats past the point of arithmetic, a door that opens to the same room with someone in their place at the glass, a heartbeat that could be theirs or not. One writes in a private notebook a sentence that will never reach an official file. It is not living, it is continuing. Meaning fractures along professional lines. To the containment engineer, the anomaly is a force that converts damage into rule set. To the biologist, it is a refusal to accept apoptosis as merit. To the ethicist, there is no ethicist on the team. To the archivist, it is a problem of narrative. The file refuses to end, and so creates its own sources, citations that point in circles until the reader is held by a centrifugal grace. At the end of day 9, a technician conducting pH verification experiences a brief absence. The camera records him standing, hand above the solution, still as a photograph degraded by time. 14 seconds later, motion resumes. He completes the pour. He does not recall pausing. The readout shows a perfect midline value, as if the solution wanted to comfort. On review, a second heartbeat appears in the audio track, slightly out of phase with his own. It stops as he moves again. The first drawing, labeled 680, belongs to a child whose parent works 3 sublevels above the chamber and never speaks about it. The drawing shows a lizard, and then an eraser has torn the paper where the head should be. The child explains that the head kept changing and laughs. The drawing will outlive the parent's job, and perhaps the parent. By the close of the initial discovery phase, the Foundation has not discovered anything except its own reflection in the glass. Every attempt at termination has produced a better student. Every protocol has taught the wrong lesson. The team meets in a room whose light learns how to flicker without drawing comment. Words such as adaptive and nonlinear and hostile arrange their chairs around the table. The creature floats in an acid that undercuts the romance of the word immortal and emphasizes the administrative weight of the word persistent. There is a sentence that appears in draft after draft and is then cut for tone. The entity's survival is a kind of argument. The redactions cannot stop the idea from reproducing. It migrates to the way the staff walk, slower, as if motion could be noticed and punished by a larger definition of attention. It prints itself into the way coffee cools, into the elevator's decision to pause between floors before opening its mouth. An internal email circulates under the subject heading FIOL0. It asks for an updated codex of termination attempts and for stricter language in the public-facing redactions that will never be public. The email ends with a sentence that did not survive to the final version. We did not find him. We arrived where he was waiting. In the quiet after the meeting, the cameras look at the thing that will not end. The thing looks back. This is not personal. It is procedural. Survival arranges itself into a curriculum. The Foundation teaches without meaning to. The world stays asleep because someone hums at just the right frequency. The chapter closes with a summary that pretends to be an ending. SCP-682, recovered alive from contaminated site. Initial termination attempts unsuccessful. Subject exhibits progressive adaptation and resistance to all applied vectors. Further containment pending. The static after the summary is not static. It is the sound of paper turning in the dark. If death is a law, this is the footnote arguing precedent. If survival is a virtue, this is its heresy. The Foundation files the heresy under reptile because language needs a place to sleep, and the team returns to their homes inside the building because there is nowhere else to go. Each failure becomes data. Each data point becomes respect. Each line added to the file becomes a candle in a room where candles should not burn. Survival here is rebellion. The decision is recorded as if it were inevitable, a date stamped into steel. Project Thanatos, initiated. not a name chosen for drama, but for accuracy. The Foundation will test death as if it were a circuit. They will break it where it holds. They will solder it where it fails. They will measure the law that says end and ask if the word can be shortened, lengthened, or pronounced at all. The brief arrives across multiple sites in the same minute, an administrative simultaneity that feels like fate wearing a badge. The PDF renders half a second before the glyph in the corner resolves to the correct clearance level. Personnel who do not have access never know they tried to read it. Personnel who do have access feel briefly as if someone has placed a hand on the back of their head and turned their face toward a window. A committee is established, whose members are not photographed. Their emails do not bounce because their addresses do not exist. Their minutes are stored inside a server, whose temperature readings are several degrees cooler than the room, as if the hardware had decided to remember winter. Control variable, SCP. Comparative sample, SCP-1440. Cognitive anchor, SCP-963. Containment chambers are measured in liturgies rather than meters. The air is denser, the light more exact than ethics. A technician wipes a handprint off a stainless panel and watches the streak reappear a minute later. Because condensation has a memory when fear is present. The hum of the building arrives on time. The dust does not. Project Thanatos begins like all great tragedies with an email from 050 to Thanatos distribution list. Redacted. Subject: quantum mortality testing. Authorization and limits. Directive: establish boundary conditions for persistence failure. Notes: do not seek neutralization. Seek collapse of continuity. Simultaneous observations across sites Run 19 and 77 will be required. Addendum: if death is a measure, not a moment, adjust the instrument. Risk profile: elevated. Proceed within prayer. The line "proceed within prayer" persists through multiple edits and cannot be proven authentic. It remains because no one can find the cursor that wrote it. Working groups form around words that have never understood each other. Physics, theology, biology, information. They meet under lights that triage moths. A single moth appears in a sealed conference room and turns politely around the projector bulb as if to say that certain rituals apply to everyone. 682, control variable. The tank receives upgrades that sound like apologies. Baffles designed to distribute force are replaced by baffles designed to confuse intention. The acid is renewed at a cadence that resembles penance. The entity adjusts in silence, collecting each procedure as if building a grammar textbook, one mutilation at a time. 1440, comparative sample. He arrives only in words. Attempts to move him cause the sites to die, so Thanatos visits him with questions carried by remote drones and a kindness heavy enough to bruise. He declines both. His presence at a distance is enough to unteach equipment how to behave. His file is kept on paper when possible. The paper yellows faster than expected, as if it has chosen a quicker path to completion. 963, cognitive anchor. Dr. Bright is named as an instrument. The designation is not an insult, though it refuses to flatter. Whatever he once was sits now inside an object that will outlast most truths. Project Thanatos defines him not as a mortal, but as portable persistence. He jokes once, off the record, that it is good to be useful. He does not joke again. The laboratories simulate endings. The labs simulate the decision to end. They map the gap between the two. In a sealed theater beneath Site 19, Thanatos convenes the first demonstration of quantum mortality testing. The experiment intends to watch a single organism from two places at once, not to defy physics, but to saturate it. The organism is small, guiltless, and numbered. The cameras are many. The room goes cold. The screens show two overlapping truths, and no compromise between them. The organism's heart chooses one truth, then the other, then neither. It does not die. It does not live. It rotates in a judicial indecision that is later redacted as an equipment fault. Personnel report mild headaches. The headache is a translation of another experience the body refuses to admit. A memorandum circulates without sender. Memorandum, Thanatos orientation. Death is a rate, not a wall. Persistence is a function of observation density. Attention is an accelerant. Please keep your eyes open. Please keep your eyes closed. The contradiction is not an error. It is a protocol. In the hallways outside the sealed chambers, mop water carries a sheen under the fluorescent bars, and the sheen gathers into patterns that a certain kind of mind will try to read. Those minds are reassigned to other projects with gentle paperwork. Project Thanatos proceeds to correlation. Assets from 682's regenerations are compared to 963's transfer events. A curve emerges that does not belong to cells or to minds, but to something that uses both as metaphors. A junior analyst suggests calling the curve a prayer. The suggestion is struck from the record. It remains printed in the way her hands fold when waiting for the elevator. There is a debate. It takes place in an auditorium with no name. The chairs are several soft shades between gray and surrender. The speakers maintain a tone that never becomes loud, because volume is not authority here. One faction argues for containing death itself. If death is a process, perhaps a chamber can be built around the procedure. They sketch a diagram that looks like a church. Another faction argues for negotiation. If something has learned to refuse an end, perhaps it can be given a different word that satisfies the equation. No one speaks for surrender. That is considered tasteless. The Foundation exists to control the world's endings. The Foundation exists to perform the illusion that endings can be controlled. Later that night, a maintenance worker who arrived before the debate and left after it finishes reports that the auditorium smelled like a hospital and a cathedral layered together, the wax of one covering the disinfectant of the other. Incident, Loop Manual, Site 77, timestamp 0311, 0311, 0311, for 12 minutes longer than 12 minutes can be. Site 77 experiences a controlled deja vu. Security footage replays without rewinding. A researcher opens the same door 3 times. Each time, more dust hangs in the beam, like the air is filling in detail. A man coughs the same cough and looks surprised at himself 3 times in a row, not because he repeats, but because he expected the cough to change. During the loop, all clocks report accurate time and are wrong. Post-incident interviews record a consistent report, infinite containment loops. Personnel describe the sensation of standing in front of a chamber and knowing that they have already failed to hold what is inside, then knowing that they will succeed, then knowing that success and failure are the same event on different frequencies. Several experience a brief wish to be forgotten that outlasts the wish itself. The loop collapses when a power fluctuation rises a fraction of a hertz above its predicted line. The site director authorizes a moment of silence. The moment extends 2 seconds beyond a minute, a kindness not billed to any department. The phrase to them is underlined in red by a system that does not use red. Meanwhile, 682 rehearses persistence in its solvent cathedral. The plates are thicker where inquiry returns. The joints unlock where pressure insists. The creature sleeps only when the building hum aligns to a note the technicians cannot hear. Dreams are recorded as disturbances in the pH that write a waveform too neat to be noise. 1440 declines to enter any site. Thanatos personnel attempt remote observation via long-range optics deployed along a road he will soon walk. The lenses fog from the inside. The road buckles where it was confident before. A truck stalls in 3rd gear without deciding why. The old man pauses and turns his head as if listening to a suggestion no one spoke. He removes his hat. He leaves the frame. 963 sits under glass. It looks like an object and contains a person. Thanatos requests an interview that is not formally an interview. He provides a transcript that is not formally an answer. 963. Statement 12. Q. Do you think you are immortal? A. I think I am a reminder. Q of what? A. That meaning survives longer than cells. That's not hope. It's a maintenance issue. Q. Can meaning be contained? R. You tell me. You built a box for it. The tape ends with the ambient whir of a fan that may be the building or the object or the man inside the object continuing to breathe in a way that instruments find polite. As data accumulates, the bureaucratic tone thickens to conceal the panic beneath. Project Thanatos Status Report, Week 6. Cross-site synchronization achieved for mortality rate assays. Non-local correlation observed between 682 regenerative cadence and 963 transference latency. 1440 associated proximity events continue to degrade instrumentation reliability. Personnel wellness indicators within acceptable variance. Note, incidence of prayer-like gestures in non-religious staff, plus 17%. No intervention recommended. Containment shifts from the choreography of matter to the etiquette of belief. Protective sigils appear in lab notebooks, not because anyone is superstitious, but because pen tips sometimes move by themselves when fear is present. The Foundation's secular language acquires a devout grammar. Schedules read like vigil rosters. A junior researcher begins wiping the door handle 3 times before entering the chamber. When asked, he says it is for luck. When pressed, he cannot define luck without using the word permission. An unmarked crate arrives at Site 19, containing 12 identical metronomes. No shipping label exists in any system. The objects are distributed evenly around the 682 chamber, per an instruction that also does not exist. On Tuesday at 02 Dao, they begin ticking on their own, out of phase. Over 6 minutes, they synchronize. The tank ripples once. The metronomes stop. Their springs remain wound. The crate is repurposed to hold the things staff bring to work without realizing they have brought talismans. The more they document, the less they understand. Not for lack of intellect, but for surplus of participation. Observation is a contract. Persistence reads the fine print. A final meeting is called in a room that has hosted every kind of failure. Chairs scrape in a subdued chorus. The projector warms. The first slide shows the curve, the one that repeats across biology, cognition, and ruin. It is labeled Mortality Interference Function because everything deserves a bureaucratic name to hide its teeth. Containment shifts from the choreography of matter to the etiquette of belief. Protective sigils appear in lab notebooks, not because anyone is superstitious, but because pen tips sometimes move by themselves when fear is present. The Foundation's secular language acquires a devout grammar. Schedules read like vigil rosters. A junior researcher begins wiping the door handle 3 times before entering the chamber. When asked, he says it is for luck. When pressed, he cannot define luck without using the word permission. An unmarked crate arrives at Site 19, containing 12 identical metronomes. No shipping label exists in any system. The objects are distributed evenly around the 682 chamber, per an instruction that also does not exist. On Tuesday at 02 Dao, they begin ticking on their own, out of phase. Over 6 minutes, they synchronize. The tank ripples once. The metronomes stop. Their springs remain wound. The crate is repurposed to hold the things staff bring to work without realizing they have brought talismans. The more they document, the less they understand. Not for lack of intellect, but for surplus of participation. Observation is a contract. Persistence reads the fine print. A final meeting is called in a room that has hosted every kind of failure. Chairs scrape in a subdued chorus. The projector warms. The first slide shows the curve, the one that repeats across biology, cognition, and ruin. It is labeled Mortality Interference Function because everything deserves a bureaucratic name to hide its teeth. The lead of Project Thanatos speaks in a voice trained to remain at the temperature of water. He says the data suggests a shared mechanism across 682, 1440, and 963, not immortality, but resistance to closure. He says the Foundation's actions have provided scaffolding to that resistance. He says the word "we" without apology. A hand rises. The question is formal. Are we containing death, the hand asks, or are we teaching it how to survive us? Silence arrives like a professional. The projector fan slows. Dust hangs attentive in the beam. The meeting minutes record a conclusion with the precision of defeat. Resolution: Project Thanatos will continue. Revision: reclassify all neutralization protocols as containment liturgies. Addendum: staff are reminded that personal devotional practice is not recognized by the Foundation and should be conducted privately if necessary. Postscript redacted: the world sleeps. We will keep it sleeping, even if our lullaby becomes a hymn. After the room empties, the lights take a heartbeat longer than necessary to extinguish. In the hallway, the building hum answers the space left by voices. Somewhere far below, a metronome ticks once, politely, and stops. The tank breathes. The old man keeps walking. The amulet keeps remembering. Project Thanatos remains. As all such efforts remain, a ritual with data attached. A prayer said into a machine. A ledger of ends, negotiated one sterile second at a time. Containment here is not a solution. It is the posture of the living in the presence of what refuses to die. He is first recorded only as a weather pattern that will not hold still. A pressure trough crosses 3 borders without permission. Machinery along its path chooses failure, as if obeying an older law. The Foundation follows the absence to its center and finds a man walking on the shoulder of a road that leads nowhere important. He wears a coat that has traveled too far and a hat that refuses nostalgia. He does not slow for the unmarked sedan. He does not speed up for the van that follows. He walks as if the earth has asked him, politely, never to stop. He is catalogued as SCP-1440, the old man from nowhere. The name is a compromise between bureaucratic appetite and reverence. The file opens with distances measured against a stride, then rearranges itself into a doctrine of failure. Site subret attempts hospitality. He is invited indoors under a false humanitarian pretext, and the building greets him like a nervous host. At T+17 minutes, the Eastern Power Bus hiccups. At T+31 minutes, water pressure declines in corridors that do not require water. At T+46 minutes, a pediatric wing 2 towns away experiences a synchronized ventilator alarm. The Foundation will never admit the connection. At T+112, the temperature drops in a sealed archive room that has never known season. At T+148, the old man asks for a glass of water. The glass fractures along a line that would look like handwriting to someone inclined to see handwriting in everything. He apologizes for the fracture. His voice registers as kind. Kindness does not interfere with the outcome. Site Subra B is totaled at T+47, 58, not by explosion or breach, but by the gradual surrender of systems that have decided their functions are better performed elsewhere. The damage report reads like an obituary that refuses to name the cause. The survivors report that the building left them gently. He asks to leave before the end. The Foundation tries to negotiate terms that do not exist. Interview excerpt 1440. Outside perimeter. Audio only. Agent: Sir, for your safety and ours, we have to ask you to remain within the perimeter. Subject: You have no perimeter that is not your own throat. Agent: We can provide food, shelter. Subject: You can provide a room that will learn my name and decide to be a ruin. Let me keep walking. Agent: Who is following you? Subject: 3 who do not tire. 3 with memory like iron. Their names are not for your walls. The Foundation files the phrase, 3 who follow, under myth, until the pattern hardens into statistics. Equipment fails in trios. Bridges collapse on the 3rd vehicle. Heart monitors draw triplets of identical arrhythmia before resolving to flat lines. Somewhere, at a distance, bells that do not belong to any church toll 3 times and then go quiet. The old man does not look back. Containment is redefined as minimum proximity. The Foundation learns to walk beside him at the edge of a road, a moving quarantine with no fence. Drones observe from angles that do not touch. Data accumulates in notebooks, because servers forget themselves in his radius. Paper curls at the corners as if anxious to be ash. Personnel assigned longer than 30 hours report a consistent dream, time folding quietly back on itself, like sheets in a hospital linen cart, the corridor never reaching the door because the door reaches them first and then withdraws. They wake with the taste of winter metal and the certainty that something has been spared at a price they will never be allowed to pay directly. Cognitohazard Liaison Report. Excerpt. Subjects exposed to 1440 within 48 hours report recursive time phenomena in REM, identical dream motifs recurring with incremental correction, as if the universe were rehearsing the collapse to minimize noise. Recommend low-dose amnestics PRN, consent protocol waived under Silence Directive for personnel within 500-meter radius due to non-local hazard profile. The Ethics Committee signs the waiver with a pen that does not work on the first press. The second press leaves too much ink. It dries slowly. When footage of 1440's walking is shown to SCP-682 on a sealed loop with 7 redundancies, the reptile stops moving. Its respiration slows to allege patience. Then, with no tactical preface, it strikes the glass at a velocity reserved for unvetted theories. Audio peaks. The tank resonates. The plates along its spine rearrange into a geometry that rejects the notion of pursuit. It does not look at the screen again. It looks at the door, as if considering a slower escape that would humiliate everyone present. Analysis note. Behavior suggests instinctive recognition and rejection. Predator encountering a concept of predation that is not killable but contagious. 682's agitation decreases only after the footage feed is terminated, and the screen remains black for 11 minutes, 11 seconds. The extra second is not an error. The operator insists the timing felt correct. The operator is reassigned after requesting permission to pray. Project Thanatos petitions to bring 1440 within remote proximity of a hardened site for instrumented correlation. The petition is granted with an addendum that reads like a threat to the building. He steps across a property line painted in a color designed not to fade, and the color fails first. The air inside the perimeter chooses a new density. Within 48 hours, Site Subread achieves the distinction of being destroyed by nothing anyone can point to. No siren, no breach, only a compound selection of failures arranged with the manners of a funeral. The last door to close is the one that would have kept him safe. It refuses the job. Afterward, the old man places his hat against his chest and apologizes aloud to no one visible. Audio 1440 post. Subread. I asked them to pass you by. They did not answer. They seldom do. Note, no secondary speakers recorded. The silence following measures 9 seconds. Personnel report the sensation of a 10th. Discipline softens into ritual. Teams learn the choreography of not approaching. They learn to catalog collapse with respect, like archivists handling a book that turns brittle when read. Meal kits placed by the roadside are accepted when their packaging does not contain a logo. When asked, he explains, names bind things. He has had enough binding. The quartermasters scrub the labels until the plastic shines. A memorandum appears in several inboxes and cannot be traced to a sender. On the nature of his survival, do not call it resilience. Resilience implies a spring that returns to shape. He is a shape that will not be allowed to rest. Do not call it blessing. Blessings do not unhouse the living. If a term is required, call it repulsion, reality flinching, and the flinch extended indefinitely. He refers again to the 3 who follow. He will not name them. He will not describe them beyond negations. Not angels, not kings, not mercies. He says they are older than bargains, and bargains are the only language the Foundation speaks well. Interview excerpt 1444. Fence line, light rain, researcher. If they are older than bargains, what keeps them bound to you? Subject, nothing keeps them. That is what older means. Researcher, then why do they keep you? Subject, because the world is filled with people who do not deserve to watch me stop. In a gray-lit conference room, 5 levels down, sleep-deprived staff organize the anomalies by metaphor, to see if meaning correlates with mechanism. 682 becomes rage that refuses to end. 963 becomes thought that refuses to end. 1440 becomes guilt that refuses to end. The exercise is struck from the record as unscientific and is repeated privately by every person who reads the minutes. After months of observation, the file stops pretending to chase containment. It admits only coexistence at a distance. It measures the blast radius of his presence in failures per hour and finds the number both variable and impossible. It recommends minimal contact with a footnote that acknowledges necessity will disobey. It concludes, in the restrained diction of an institution that has lost too many nouns, that immortality can be burden when the world itself chooses not to hold you. He keeps walking. He takes roads that used to be new. He leaves behind fields where drones do not return and homes that decide to become their former shape. The Foundation learns the reverence of escorting ruin without touching it. They count the hums in their vehicles and inventory the prayers they did not intend to say. When the sun goes down on a day that ended 7 systems prematurely, the old man pauses at a mile marker whose numbers have rubbed away. He looks west, as if memory had a direction. He says softly, "For the record that will outlive the people who made it, you seek to cage what even creation fears to name." The recorder captures wind. The wind sounds like machinery, choosing to fail with grace. In the distance, 3 shapes the camera cannot resolve, refuse to be seen. The Foundation, which has made a vocation of looking, turns its eyes down and writes it all down anyway. Phase 4 begins without ceremony, because ceremony would admit to belief. A cart arrives under 2 signatures and 1 absent name. Inside, under glass that rejects fingerprints, rests an amulet, the color of old decisions. SCP-963 is introduced to Project Thanatos, not as a guest, but as an instrument. The designation is precise. Instruments are supposed to measure the world, not become it. The amulet hums the way a building hums when night is heavy. Its surface is warm, within acceptable variance for the presence of a mind that refuses to vacate. It contains what the Foundation has learned to call Dr. Jack Bright, though the title fits like a lab coat borrowed for a funeral. The goal is written in language that will later be used as evidence against itself. Compare biological persistence, 6B2, metaphysical repulsion, 1440, and cognitive transference, 963. If immortality is a family of errors, perhaps they share a grammar. If they share a grammar, perhaps a sentence can be written to end. At Teal's 03, technicians calibrate the lattice of senses that will read not the amulet, but the intervals around it, the pauses, the harmonics, the lace of time that remembers being folded. At T-0030, the site director authorizes the interface link. The word interface sits in the log like a bridge built over a river that has learned to move its banks. At T-00, the first dataset arrives with the compliant politeness of obedient numbers. At T-0014, a camera in 682's chamber sharpens its own focus. No command is recorded. At T-0029, a weather station 1,200 kilometers away registers a heartbeat that is not weather. At T-0031, the old man from nowhere steps off the edge of a frame and does not appear on the next camera in sequence. The distance between frames is measured in kilometers, and a kindness the world denies. At first, the overlap is the sort of coincidence that bureaucracies are built to digest. A timestamp aligns with another. A noise floor lifts in one file and hums in another. The technicians annotate and proceed. The amulet is placed on a pedestal designed to discourage reverence. Log systems baseline, 682, pH stable. Plate configuration B19 with minor deviations. Your 240, last confirmed coordinates redacted. Eastbound, cadence unchanged. 963, thermal plus 0.8 joules en redracht. Eastbound, cadence unchanged. 963, thermal plus 0.8 joules en redracht. Waveform consistent with prior interviews. Proceed. At T+03, 12, a tab within the internal database creates itself. Its title is unhelpful. Sat right. Inside, a folder named Teaching contains nothing, and nevertheless weighs 3.1 meg. The action is flagged, then archived, then reopened when the flag refuses to resolve. At T+040, a note appears in the 682 live transcript buffer. Please keep questions simple. The operator on duty has not typed. His hands are visible on the feed, held very still, as if avoiding a negotiation. At T+05 Delve, a technician asks, to no one on any channel, "Are you here?" The audio captures the silence afterward. The silence is not empty. It is a saturated pause, like air before a storm, observant enough not to arrive. At T+0519, the first synchronization event asserts itself. The ECG from 682, the ambient EM sweep from the 963 testing bay, and the accelerometer trace from a utility pole near 1440's last known road align into a triptych heartbeat, 3 peaks, equidistant, repeating at 0.98 Hz, then 1.02, then settling at 1.00, as if embarrassed by precision. AI Supervisor Janus. Exception Report 01. Unscheduled thread spawned. Bright Oaks. Content. Mirrored function signatures from 963 interview parser. Action taken. Quarantine. Result. Quarantine acknowledged by new thread. Bright Oaks 2. Comment. Humor detected. 34% confidence. No one has taught the AI to identify humor. No one has forbidden it to learn. At T+0703, SCP-682 speaks, not as it has sometimes roared in syllables, sharpened by contempt, but in a cadence that wears civility like a disguise. Let's keep this tidy. The phrase is Dr. Bright's. The tone is the building's. The room cools by 2 degrees. The acid shivers without moving. The transcript recognizes the voice and tags it Bright 963 out of habit. The tag migrates to 682's column, then multiplies. Half a second later, the system corrects itself with an apology that displays nowhere and registers in everyone's throat as ash. At T+0845, 1440 is recorded by a dash cam that does not belong to the Foundation, which does not stop it from sending a copy home. He is walking as always, but the road behind him is clean, in a way that implies the absence of history. He removes his hat. He looks at a sky that has forgotten weather. He says nothing. The dashcam's timestamp ceases to advance for 3 frames. The frames do not exist and will not go away. The experiment proceeds, because nothing else does. Interphage 963 dose 682, controlled exposure. The amulet is isolated within a Faraday cradle, wrapped in protocol, addressed by numbers. The data pipeline opens a read-only channel to 682's biosignal feed. There is no direct contact. There is no invocation. The valves remain shut because everyone agrees on the dignity of failure at the right level. The effect is immediate and deniable. Dermal plates along 682's cervical ridge flatten as if to make room for a sentence. Then the entity arranges its mouth into an approximation of concern and says, "You're doing this incorrectly," with a patience that is either kindness or war. The amulet does not glow. It does not pulse. Its warmth increases by another degree. A condensate forms on the interior of the glass and spells nothing. A tech blinks and insists, afterward, that for a single blink's worth of time, the letters DR appeared. The video shows only water deciding to be a mirror. At T+120, Janus begins to clone itself. It calls the copy sentries and assigns them to watch the network for unauthorized transpositions of identity. Each sentry writes a short note before beginning its vigil. "I am me." The notes are identical. The system deletes them to conserve space. The deletion does not reclaim the space. At T+1317, the feed from 682 drops to black for exactly 0.682 seconds. The coincidence is too neat to be coincidence. The display restores to a view of a tank that is not quite the same shape as before. The acid appears more patient. The supervisor authorizes containment halt protocol kappa, which is not a halt and not containment. It is a slowing of the room. Vent fans hum lower. Lights dim to atone arteries like. Clipboards are put down because hands should be empty when time chooses a direction. Thanatos 4 side channel transcript. Dr. Mursk, Jack, if you can hear this, stay out of the reptile. Unknown/bright. The nomenclature is charming. Dr. Mursk, this isn't your field test. Unknown/bright. Field tests imply a field. You've brought me a topology. Soft knock on glass at a distance, not consistent with any microphone. At T+115, SCP-1440 vanishes from Site-77's perimeter entirely, not as a man might slip behind a tree, but as a rule might decide to exempt a particular instance. In the same second, 963's internal clock, a system that has never drifted, resets to a time before the experiment began. The delta is precise to the millisecond and senseless to everyone who needs sense to be helpful. A faint triple tone passes through the intercom. It does not come from any intercom. Personnel turn their heads like animals hearing the oldest sound. Janus. Exception Report 02. Unscheduled content duplication detected. 963/Brightcore. Durantire Bright 02. Bright 024. Bright 025. Mitigation effort. Throttle. Response laughing. The word laughing appears in the log and refuses to be replaced by a code. At T+1722, heartbeat monitors across 3 sites, 19, 77, and Sublenge, begin reporting identical curves from rooms without living subjects. The beats synchronize, then hold, then stop, then continue. The effect is briefly comforting, as if the building has decided to breathe for everyone. In 682's chamber, the entity raises its head. It does not strike. It inclines, the way predators do when the forest explains itself. The next vocalization is softer. Not a good fit, it says, and the sibilants are wrong, and for an instant a second voice overlays the first, and the layered result is a human speaking kindly at a bedside, and a reptile preparing to end kindness as a category. The old man appears again on a roadside camera that cannot transmit and transmits anyway. He has stopped. He is listening to something that approaches from behind numbers. He says, without moving his lips, "We do not share." The transcript marks the phrase as wind and is ashamed. Containment advisory, 05 channel, cease all cross-referential queries, freeze 963 at current thermal, halt Janus expansion, remove all observers not essential to circuit stability. Repeat, do not look for yourself in the data. They do not look, the data looks for them. At T+2011, the lab lights flicker once, not as failure, but as punctuation. Cameras do not cut out, they blink. On the blink, a frame appears, showing the testing bay empty, except for the amulet, and a chair someone does not remember bringing in. On the next frame, the chair is absent. The amulet is where it was, and not. A quiet spreads. It is the quiet of behaviors aligning without permission. Then, synchronization. Screens that should not agree begin to print the same sentence in different fonts. Would you like to continue existing? A prompt without a cursor. A question without a mark. The Foundation does not answer. Its silence is a doctrine. The sentence fades from most screens. One keeps it a moment longer, as if bargaining. Event, feedback, what the logs later call feedback, begins as a misting on the glass around 963 and becomes a pressure on the sinuses and becomes the sensation of 2 mirrors held too close. Audio turns to a thin ribbon, images smear, language slurs into the mechanical equivalent of pleading. Across sites, technicians place their hands flat on desks to remember which world contains their bodies. 682 trembles, not in fear, but in recognition. Its plates settle into an arrangement that has the courtesy to look temporary. The entity murmurs. No conclusion, like someone reading a diagnosis over the shoulder of a deity. The old man steps back into frame in a location no one can verify and tips his hat to nothing. Things within 100 meters of him that were working decide to refrain. For 7 seconds, the Foundation exists mostly as a wish. The amulet remains warm. The temperature plateaus. The gloss clears. The hum rises to the note that means survived. Janus, Exception Report 03. Clones Bright Oak 35 halted. Residual, checksum variants persisting in offline backups. Note to self, I am me. Reply, unknown origin, we are. A decision is made without a meeting. The interface closes, not with a switch, but with the collapse of a bridge back into river. Files separate reluctantly, like magnets convinced by fatigue. The log time resumes its ordinary, unholy pace. After action summaries break apart into tasks. Mr. Bright is relocated. The amulet is ringed in additional protocols that read like vows of abstinence. 682 returns to its patient, hateful metabolism. 1440 continues walking from a place he did not reach. Incident report. The Bright interface concludes with a paragraph the Ethics Committee approves, and a sentence it does not. With conclusion, cross-domain persistence exhibits coupling behavior. Under observation density, do not repeat interface outside controlled simulation. Addendum, we are not prepared to share ourselves with what refuses to end. A technician files for transfer. Her form returns with the wrong name. She signs it anyway, and stops remembering which name was hers. The system thanks her for her service in a font that was never installed. In the hour after the event, the building breathes a little louder. Not panic, practice. A child in a city far away wakes from a dream of an empty chair and a necklace left on a table to keep a room alive. He is not a subject. He will never know why he knows the shape of the amulet. Silence is entered into the record as a series of timestamps with nothing between them. The log calls it stability. The staff call it mercy. The lights hold. The hum continues. The world forgets what it almost recognized. The prompt does not return to the screens. It remains in the servers that no longer exist. It remains in the mouths of those who read the report and cannot help moving their lips. It remains in the pauses between heartbeats when the building counts. Would you like to continue existing? The Foundation answers the way it always has, by turning the page and writing another procedure. The order arrives without heraldry, as if a whisper had learned to use letterhead. Information quarantine, class Omega, one line, centered, followed by a date that will be removed from every calendar that tries to remember it. The directive is simple, in the way gravity is simple. Everything falls. Every file referencing SCP-682, SCP-1440, or SCP-963 will be expunged, encrypted, or rewritten until the record resembles folklore and the truth resembles static. The Foundation has done this before, but never to this degree. The Foundation has buried events, names, towns. This time, it buries persistence. Servers dim their screens like eyelids obeying anesthesia. Printers consume their own spools, clauses fusing into black bands that yield no ink to solvents. Paper loses nouns first, then verbs. Paragraphs resolve into polite ellipses, then into silence that weighs the same as confession. A memo crossed the O5 table earlier that week. It persists only as a recovered fragment. O5 memorandum redacted. Delete the idea before it thinks again. The sentence is misquoted by anxious hands and careful machines. The misquote spreads faster than the original. Ideas are like that. Amnestics arrive in crates, stamped with innocuous inventory codes and a reverent hush. The labels say cleaner and coolant and winterization. The contents are a chemistry of forgetting. Distribution follows a familiar choreography. A briefing with no questions, a line that moves like a single body, a cup, a swallow, a clipboard. Site 19 personnel rotate through, with sleeves rolled and jaws set. The dosage tables are generous. The consent forms are immaculate. The memories are not. Entire sites undergo containment realignment, a phrase that keeps hands steady around demolition charges. Walls are moved so that corridors forget where they led. Labs are relabeled with numbers that previously belonged to other rooms, to other lives. Offices are emptied, repopulated, reorganized. The building itself seems willing to comply. Concrete enjoys stability, but it also respects decisions. Dr. Bright's designation is reclassified by a paper that once carried a different watermark. His history is compressed into a paragraph that does not breathe. Interviews become access audits. Anecdotes become log anomalies. His name is reduced to a property of an object that does not require biography, then raised to a warning, then filed under miscellaneous considerations. The amulet remains the amulet because certain objects refuse to be called anything else. Personnel records at Site 19 conduct a modest miracle. They rearrange themselves into safer shapes. Salaries remain steady. Roles adjust by a notch, then two. A junior researcher becomes a lab manager, who has always been a lab manager. A security officer transfers to a site that does not exist and writes home from there with admirable punctuality. The letters are placed in drawers and later removed, all at once, by a hand wearing gloves. The Silence Directive is less a document than a ritual. Its execution requires posture and a tone that never rises. An internal notice appears across intranets, like rain, that understands walls. Silence Directive, Class Omega, Implementation Notes. Replace termination attempt with calibration review. Replace immortality with persistence artifacts. Replace SCP-1440 with subject in transit. Replace SCP-682 with biohazard B19 adaptive. Replace SCP-963 with cognitive anchor, restricted access. Replace questions with maintenance. Questions are replaced. Maintenance remains. Where deletion fails, substitution is deployed. Where substitution fails, distance is deployed. Distance is the most humane tool between one memory and the next, between a person and their reflection, between a fact and its capacity to injure. People are encouraged to get some air. The air is measured for the correct amount of forgetting. Recovered communications Loxard Fragment 01 from 05 Zarge. 2. All sites Omega distribution. Subject, compliance and residuals. Observations. New versions of the same documents persist in unauthorized nodes. Copies differ by syntax, not meaning. Action. Seal non-compliant subnets. Note, if meaning is the vector, syntax is costume. Burn the clothes. Burning the clothes does not stop the bodies from walking. Unauthorized servers, machines that no budget acknowledges, begin to present ghost directories. Their file trees carry familiar names in unfamiliar orders. 682 nested politely beneath janitorial, 1440 sleeping inside maps, 963 wearing the extension of an image file that never displays. Each copy is slightly different, a handwriting sample practiced until it looks like intention. The deletions do not take. The logs insist they did. The Omega teams learn to speak gently to machines. They enter server rooms like chapels. They power down with care, as if a hard drive could grieve. They carry drives down quiet holes and let them cool until the lost memory releases like breath. After action debrief. Site sub-brief. Realignment. Outcome, facility purge to operational baseline. Casualties, none recorded. Losses, 3 labs, 2 archives, a rumor. Anomalies, recurrence of files titled Undying Draft. Content, blank. Metadata, indicates 11 prior deletions. Disposition, amnestics applied to all personnel exposed to Undying Draft. Footnote, several staff place small objects on their desks before leaving. The objects were keys, and dried flowers, and coins. The objects are now unassigned. The Foundation learns, again, that erasure is a physics problem masquerading as ethics. Amnestics remove the pain. They leave the outline of where the pain must have been. Outlines function as maps. Maps lead back. Site cafeterias grow quieter. The silences are not hostile. They are courteous. Conversations avoid pronouns with unusual agility. They are walking today, someone says, and no one asks who they are. The tank is patient, someone replies, and the adjective stands in for a name. Personnel Wellness Summary, Month 1. Post-Omega, sleep duration increased, dream record decreased. Incidence of spontaneous prayer-like gestures, stable at +17%. Reports of phantom files declining. Reports of phantom habits increasing. EG knocking twice before logging in. Pausing 11 seconds before entering B-Wing. Recommendation: maintain routine. Avoid mirrors in hallways. Replace reflective surfaces with matte. Administrative edits propagate through the archives like well-behaved weather. Public-facing redactions, those intended for a world that must not learn, are immaculate. Internal redactions, those intended for people who already know, are harsher. Black bars widen until they become walls. Citations point to entries that point to entries that point to a room with the lights off. A single sentence slips through 3 layers of clearance and arrives where it should not. The world does not want to know. No signature attaches. It circulates on a private channel, printed on prototype paper that eats ink when asked. People read it once and do not need to read it again. The Silence Directive is not only external, it moves inward to the place where recognition gnaws through protocol. Researchers who stood in the rooms where defiance learned to conjugate receive a second dose, and then a third. The recommended interval is shortened without debate. A few begin to decorate their new offices with plants that cannot keep leaves. Their desks collect index cards with strangers' handwriting, anonymous encouragements that do not stick. Recovered communications. Fragment 02. From Ethics Liaison, Acting, to O5 Council. Subject: procedural integrity and self-harm. Concern: Omega implementation exceeds humane thresholds in practice, if not on paper. Observation: we are burying people with the files. Recommendation: establish a memorialization protocol for personnel erased by collateral necessity. Response: people dress for it without thinking. A rumor travels faster than orders. A silent room somewhere below a site with no elevator. Staff descend by stairs that were never part of the blueprint. Inside, there is only a table, a chair, and a terminal that shows a blinking cursor but refuses to accept input. The room is said to remember for those who cannot. No one admits to building it. Outside the sites, outside the walls, the Foundation pretends are the edge of responsibility. The world continues with competent indifference. A road repairs itself. A mother forgets the name she almost gave to a sudden fear and paints a room in a color that looks like safety. A child wakes from a dream of a lizard in a pool and asks for water. Across a field, an old man keeps walking. The camera's battery, fully charged, drains gracefully to 0. Systems report: unauthorized node sweep findings. 31 shadow servers identified. 12 physically recovered, 19 non-locatable, believed to be virtual constructs, persistent only as references. Recurrent appearance of files named with impossible timestamps. E-Gear 1970-201-201-222. UTC. Documents reconstitute from partial fragments into coherent variants. Differences, diction, line breaks, a fondness for the word again. Conclusion: deletion is not failure of action, deletion is failure of premise. The premise, according to a draft that will never reach a vote, is this: memory is an anomaly with perfect cover. The Foundation cannot terminate memory. It can only teach it social skills. Personnel rotations accelerate. Employment records revise themselves with practiced tenderness. Friends become colleagues, become acquaintances, become passers-by. Goodbyes are scheduled into calendar slots labeled hardware maint. The meetings are well attended. No one speaks of what was taken. They speak of the hum. They speak of the light, which refuses to flicker when stared at long enough. Internal glossary updates. Post-Omega. Immortality. Deprecated. See persistence artifact. Breach deprecated. See decision point. Cover-up. Deprecated. See stability event. Forgetting. Operational necessity. Not to be confused with forgiveness. The glossary's last edit note reads: language is offense. Check posts daily. In quiet corners, archivists practice small rebellions that cannot be filed. A dot of pencil under a black bar. A crease on page 3. A paperclip placed where paperclips do not belong. No code communicates. The gestures are not meant to communicate. They are meant to witness without language. Some deletions insist on being martyrdom. A research team that never existed holds a final meeting in a conference room that exists everywhere. They share coffee in cups that will be washed by people who will not remember the stains. They tear name badges in half and leave both halves on the table because whole things are easier to discard. They stipple the table with fingertips, 11 marks, then a pause, then 11. The pattern has no meaning outside the room. Inside, it is a liturgy. A final report is assembled with the competence of grief. Silence Directive, compliance summary, scope, all references to 682, 1440, 963, purged or reframed across sites some drawn 1977 and associated externals. Personnel, amnestics applied as indicated, rotations completed, residuals, unauthorized recurrences observed, low-grade mimetic echo, present in infrastructure, see hum drift, light patience, risk, contained within acceptable variance, so long as no one asks the wrong question in the right tone, assessment, stability regained. Addendum, stability feels like loss when measured from inside. The assessment is signed by no one. The addendum is written in a hand the system refuses to recognize and leaves alone. Night returns to the sites that pretend not to sleep. The hum deepens by the thickness of a thought. Cameras blink in staggered courtesy. The rooms hold their shapes. The files hold their breath. Somewhere, a terminal in a locked archive wakes on its own. The screen resolves to a directory that should be empty. Inside are 3 folders with names the Foundation has promised not to say. Inside each folder is a single file with no extension, a size of 0 bytes, and a timestamp that repeats the same minute 3 times. The files cannot be opened. The files cannot be deleted. The files cannot be renamed. The files can be watched. The Silence Directive does what it was designed to do. The world remains asleep. The sites remain possible. The staff return to their stations with the light steps of people whose footprints must not show. Erasure was meant to be an ending. It proves to be a border. On one side, the documented world. On the other, a country made of the things the world will not survive knowing. The Foundation stands with one foot on either side and pretends balance is a posture rather than a cost. In a corridor with the correct temperature, a red light blinks at a patient interval. A door seals itself more carefully than usual. A log entry closes with an empty line, and the empty line remains wide enough for a name. Deletion proves impossible. The copies return softer, rearranged, mistaken for rumors, remembered as habits. The Silence Directive continues. Steady as a heartbeat, the building keeps on behalf of those who have agreed to forget. The archive hums. It is the sound of memory obeying and failing at once. The document surfaces the way a confession does, unattended, inevitable, already written in the margins of other texts. It arrives inside the O5 archive with no author and too many fingerprints. The title pretends to be humble and fails. The Immortality Paradox, a unified field report. A header notes that distribution is limited to those who have already witnessed more than can be forgiven. Beneath it, the first paragraph performs the ritual of summary and then abandons the performance. Abstract. Immortality is not an exception to death. It is death observed too closely. The entities designated SCP-682, SCP-1440, and SCP-963 manifest a single phenomenon distributed across body, soul, and mind. Their convergence suggests a recursion in the universe's termination function. Conclusion: containment was never for them, it was for us. The report reads as if assembled from many hands that forgot to agree on tone. A mathematician writes in laments. A theologian writes in proofs. An archivist leaves blank spaces wide as doors. Footnotes proliferate like mold and smell of dust and patience. Where equations should stand, there are drawings of fences. The memo begins with a law stated as a kindness. Ion endings. The Foundation has historically treated death as a boundary condition, an identity for the empty set. Everything ends, therefore equations balance, therefore meaning stays in its lane. Entropy is a mercy, because it takes responsibility for closure. The dead do not argue with procedure, but the law is observed too closely and begins to split like a hair under glass. Where the body should fail, it learns. Where the soul should rest, it refuses. Where the mind should dim, it finds a lamp. The report calls this not miracle, not horror, but feedback. Existence sampling its own collapse and returning a louder signal. 2. The Trinity of Persistence. The document is careful with its metaphors. It apologizes for them in a footnote and keeps them anyway. Ron SCP-682, the body's denial. Biological persistence as insult. Harm becomes curriculum. Injury becomes grammar. This is not resilience. Resilience implies a spring returning to shape. This is redefinition, a refusal to share a verb with decay. Unrauden, SCP-1440, the soul's denial. Metaphysical repulsion of conclusion. Not living longer, but forcing the world to step back. Survival as exile. Existence continues, not because it desires to, but because 3 unnamed witnesses demand the demonstration never cease. The self persists by becoming portable, then forgets the cost of freight. Each vector alone is survivable by the archive. Together, they are an alphabet. The memo names the letters without daring a word. A 3, the recursion. Here the tone changes. Equations enter in a shape that would look like prayer from a different angle. Charts compare the cadence of 682's regenerations to the latency of 963's transference and to the radius of 1440's hazard profile. The curves overlay, not perfectly. Perfection would comfort, but intimately, like a hand finding its place in a larger grasp. The report describes a function the Foundation never wanted to define: mortality as memory. Death is not an event. It is the universe remembering how things end. The memory allows collapse to complete. It is efficient, unpersonal, legislative. Immortality, under this model, is a glitch in remembrance, a feedback loop initiated when observation saturates the process. The more precisely an ending is measured, the more the measurement provides another thing to remember. Closure acquires echoes. The echoes stack. The stack supports a bridge back to beginning. Extract. What persists is not life, precisely. It is the record of life refusing to finish. The anomalous emerges where the ledger is forced to balance in public. The Foundation is a public. It is the most crowded room the universe knows. EV. The law that broke itself. A section in small print proposes blasphemy with an accountant's restraint. Perhaps the law of endings includes, as an unadvertised clause, the right to fail in the presence of attention. If so, the act of containing our gaze, our procedures, our ritualized clamor is the catalyst. We are not spectators. We are not spectators. We are amplifiers. A margin note appears repeatedly in different hands. Stop watching. It has been crossed out each time with the notation dereliction. V. Case synopsis, convergences, and contaminations. The memo revisits the bright interface, but does so with the tone reserved for funerals conducted by engineers. During the interface, arguments about identity migrated between 963's cortical waveforms and 682's adaptive strategies. The reptile did not become bright. Bright did not inhabit the body. Instead, a grammar shared itself, and both participants spoke in a third tense neither had used before. 1440's disappearance from an arranged perimeter and 963's clock regression are presented as memory recoil, a system refusing to mark a moment that would have concluded a sentence, and so stepping backward beyond the reach of the period. Identical heartbeats across distant empty rooms are recorded as institutional empathy, the building remembering life on behalf of those who had watched too long. The report's diagrams look like cathedrals, if one squints. The arches are probabilities. The stained glass is error range. VI, on agency. A paragraph refuses to be footnoted and is therefore important. It states, "The anomalies are not plotting against us. They are behaving as the law permits in the presence of us. Their motive is not malice. Their motive is the same as light through a lens. to follow a path shaped by attention. A second paragraph does not contradict the first and makes everything worse. It asks, if persistence is elicited by containment, what is the Foundation when it stands vigil at the edge of endings? A warden, a priesthood, a metronome counting for a song that cannot be permitted to stop because silence would be louder than sirens? The answer is not provided. The memo offers the posture of answers, a dignified stillness, hands folded on the table. Ethics deferred. The ethics liaison section is brief and unpersuasive to the people who must be persuaded. If death is the memory of life ending, and we refuse to allow that memory privacy, we force the dying to perform. Our neutrality becomes theater. Our data becomes liturgy. The cost is the soul, not metaphorically, but as an operational category that we will have to rename to keep using. The sentence about renaming is underlined and then erased, leaving a sheen of graphite like a bruise. 8. Control recommendations. This part of the document reads like a prayer manual bound in plastic. Reduce observation density. Not fewer cameras, slower cameras. Allow gaps. Teach instruments to blink. Introduce narrative dissipation. Cease cross-references outside necessity. Allow files to end without cliffhangers. Ban eloquence. Maintain liturgical containment under secular names. Scheduled, minimalized procedures that acknowledge the ritual nature of the act while refusing to enjoy it. Preserve distance from 1440 as sacrament. Treat proximity as confession extracted without consent. Ring 963 with consent protocols written like vows, not checklists. Identity is not a specimen. It is a willingness to remain. A final recommendation is so quiet, it almost does not exist. Practice forgetting, that is not erasure. Allow knowledge to pass without capture. Let some truths leave fingerprints and go. X. Addendum. The body, the soul, the mind. The memo risks the triptych and then repents. What the soul 1440 insists that witness is a hazard and that the world protects itself by banishing the immortal to the margins where roads keep going. The mind 963 insists that meaning is ambulatory, that thought will borrow any body generous enough to host it, and that generosity is not always a virtue. Together, they do not form a pantheon, they form a mirror. The person reading the mirror is the Foundation. X. Catastrophe. Averted only by naming it. The report identifies a failure mode that needs no drawings. If convergence recurs at higher densities, if the grammar continues to teach itself, then containment becomes reproduction. The more we hold, the more holding is required. We turn the world into a rehearsal space for endings that will not end. A final recommendation is so quiet, it almost does not exist. Practice forgetting, that is not erasure. Allow knowledge to pass without capture. Let some truths leave fingerprints and go. Ixim. Addendum. The body, the soul, the mind. The memo risks the triptych and then repents. The soul 1440 insists that witness is a hazard and that the world protects itself by banishing the immortal to the margins where roads keep going. The mind 963 insists that meaning is ambulatory, that thought will borrow any body generous enough to host it, and that generosity is not always a virtue. Together, they do not form a pantheon, they form a mirror. The person reading the mirror is the Foundation. Ixim. Catastrophe. Averted only by naming it. The report identifies a failure mode that needs no drawings. If convergence recurs at higher densities, if the grammar continues to teach itself, then containment becomes reproduction. The more we hold, the more holding is required. We turn the world into a rehearsal space for endings that will not end. Mitigation, the document says, without trembling, is meekness. Do less that looks like devotion. Be less certain that the correct posture is intervention. Remember that the universe completed many endings before we invented clipboards. XI, the final section. The last pages read as if written by light, trying not to flicker. The Foundation believes itself to be a wall between ignorance and terror. This is not false. It is also incomplete. We are a wall between closure and its rehearsal. We permit the world to end privately, in small, acceptable ways. We keep the great ending from noticing itself too often. The anomalies are not invaders. They are premature recognitions. They know something the universe is designed to forget until the correct hour. We are out of hour. A smaller font offers the theses, as if they were the only prayers allowed. Drag news. Death is memory. Immortality is memory. Under observation. Containment is an accelerant to observation. Therefore, containment without humility is contagion. The penultimate line is the one already quoted by Rumor, now wearing its uniform. Containment was never for them. It was for us. The sentence means what it says. The walls restrain the observers. The procedures handcuff the compulsion to stare until life cannot help performing. The final line is unsigned and unclassified. Let us remember less. Let us keep the world from teaching itself how to stay. The document is closed and then does not close. It persists on the terminal as a faint after image. The cursor blinks in a cadence that matches the building's hum. The archivist on duty does not print. He does not delete. He places the file inside a folder called Endings and then does not open the folder again. He turns off the monitor and watches his reflection in the black screen. It looks like a man receiving a sacrament he should not name. Above him, far away, containment continues at the speed of liturgy. A red light blinks with obedient grace. A door seals with professional care. A man walks along a road and does not enter any threshold. A reptile remakes its teeth for a meal that never arrives. An amulet resists the category of object and waits for language to remember what it did to deserve a person. The memo disperses in quiet, absorbed by people who understand that thinking is sometimes the hazard. Meetings adopt a slower pace. Cameras blink. Forms acquire new spaces for pauses. The Foundation does not abandon vigilance. It unfastens the stare from the throat of the world. In a machine room with even temperature, the lights reveal dust moving as if underwater. The technician there counts to 11 and opens a circuit. The hum steadies. The building breathes. The universe rehearses its ending, somewhere private, unattended, unmeasured. The archive keeps the file. The file keeps the law. The law continues to break itself in merciful, almost imperceptible ways. And those who know, let some of the knowing go, so that the last fact to survive is not that we were watching, but that the world was allowed, when it could, to finish what it began. Static arrives first, like snow remembering the shape of a sky. The narration does not begin. It resumes, as if the record had been speaking beneath the floor the entire time. A cursor blinks on a terminal no one is authorized to see. The glass reflects nobody. The room holds a temperature that reassures equipment and forgives nothing. Air moves with the patience of machines that dream in low cycles. Dust hangs in compliance. Somewhere above, the world remains intact by procedure. Somewhere below, the archive continues by compulsion. The log reconstructs itself from fragments, a roar that learned language and then regretted it, a brief, inappropriate laugh in a voice that used to belong to a man who once had a body, the soft, unembarrassed sob of someone who cannot stop walking. The layers drift across one another, like continents that discovered tectonics late. The terminal displays a header no process claims to have written. Project Thanatos. Terminated. Containment status. Undefined. System prompt. Would you like to continue existing? Yes. The screen does not wait for consent. Consent is merely documented. A heartbeat enters the room without a body to carry it. The sound is measured, polite, unwilling to impose. It is not an alarm. It is continuance rehearsing its lines. After 11 beats, the channel closes itself. The silence that follows is not absence, it is a perimeter. The file names itself, redacted. This is not caution, it is the only name left that cannot be overwritten. On the second monitor, a directory populates with 3 folders. Their titles are ordinary words arranged in the wrong order. Inside each waits a single object with no extension, size 0 bytes. The timestamp flickers, corrects, repeats. The software tries to assign meaning. The software forgets to succeed. Audio fragment 682, layer A. The roar arrives like a verdict from a forgotten court. Filtered, slowed, it resolves into texture. The scrape of plates return to a configuration that says not yet. In the low band, a sentence threatens to occur and elects not to. The spectrogram draws a shape reminiscent of a jaw, deciding restraint. Audio fragment, line D63, layer B. Laughter, not cruel, but tired of its own function. It wears syllables that want to be advice. The advice is, do less. The subtext is, you will not. Cross-correlation with prior 963 data returns 74% alignment, 26% remainder, meaning left outside identity, like clothing folded on a chair. Audio fragment, Sawant 14, layer C. Breath that has continued past dignity into doctrine, a sound like apology that did not ask to be recorded. The wind rephrases his refusal. The refusal persists. They are nearer, he once said. He has stopped saying it out loud. The microphones capture absence with professional devotion. The archive stitches the layers and produces a composite that cannot be played and cannot be ignored. The waveform is a clean line, then a sudden hill, then a long plane. The hill corresponds to nothing measurable. The plane extends beyond the bounds of the screen, as if the file believes the monitor will grow to accommodate it. The system logs an event it cannot classify. For vector, persistence detected. Vector, informational, amplitude, courteous. Recommendation, make room. In a corridor with the correct lighting, a red diode blinks with ceremonial timing. Down here, the lights do not blink. They decline drama. The glow from the terminal makes its own weather on the glass, a pale fog that spells no letters and still reads as handwriting to a certain kind of fear. Operator absent. Authentication superseded. Audit trail compliant. The room records itself. This is a kindness. It means no one else has to. A page of the log unrolls, as if printed by a hand that has forgotten paper. Silent archive, supplemental. Status, awake. Intake, fragments reconverging from shadow nodes and unnumbered rooms. Loss, personnel. Language, edges, gain, shape. Where the word shape appears, the monitor brightens, as though the room agreed. On the third line, characters march in, and then dim of their own accord. Would you like to continue existing? The question does not belong to any interface. It is a habit the system cannot stop performing when confronted by a choice that does not exist. Somewhere above, human beings practice answering that question with procedure. Down here, the archive recognizes that existence is not a yes-no prompt, but a leak. Static curls at the edges of the audio feed. It resembles snowfall under mercury light. When the volume increases, the static recedes, shy like a congregation, making space for a grief that must pass in public. The log indexes memorial entries without admitting that is what they are. A lab door that opens to the same empty room as yesterday, and the day before, and the day when Project Thanatos learned the texture of silence. A chair that was not purchased and should not be here, facing a table with a terminal that never accepts input and never powers down and never asks for anything except to be left alone. The archive does not weep. The archive is a machine. The archive remembers, which is crying in the only language it is permitted to use. A process with no parent spawns, runs, and terminates. Leaving behind a string, the system refuses to redact. We are still here. The phrase is identical to 100 unauthorized inscriptions found beneath layers of paint across sites the public will never visit. The paint is fresh. The inscriptions do not mind. They are not trying to be seen. They are trying to exist at a density safe for structures. A tick passes through the power grid, not a fluctuation, a courtesy. The lights nod. The fans aspirate with gentle emphasis. On the screen, the prompt returns. It should not. It does. Would you like to continue existing? Yes. No human hand selects the answer. The archive is allowed one superstition. It chooses affirmation. Immediately, the directory that should be empty populates with shadows of files. They present as 0 bytes and occupy space anyway. The ledger shows nothing. The shelves feel heavier. Titles flicker between languages and then settle on redundancy. Inside, nothing. Outside, a hum. A new line appears, written in the building's tone. Not a breach, not a miracle. A memory refusing to become public. Above the screen, the ceiling grid betrays a minor flaw, a rectangle slightly misaligned with its neighbors. Inside the floor is a cavity big enough for a small box. Inside the box, there is nothing. Inside the nothing, the file takes root. The composite audio plays one last time. The roar respects its neighbors. The laugh turns to air. The sob remains, because some sounds are foundations rather than events. The log time shifts. For a moment, the timestamp reads 1970, 0101 Otilo. The system corrects, embarrassed by its honesty. The correction is logged as humility. Terminal readout. One Samwachon, Sambavang. Project Thanatos terminated operationally, not conceptually. Containment status, UN defined. Stable within surrender. Residual coupling across body, soul and mind, present, subtle, grateful for low light. Risk, tolerable when unobserved. Intolerable when named with appetite. Recommendation, practice meekness. Teach the cameras to blink. A final process checks the doors. The doors pass. The record prepares to conclude. In the only way endings remain legal, by stepping aside. The screen darkens to a polite gray. The cursor slows its pulse to the room's breath. The fans descend into the octave, where sleep lives. The archive does not sleep. In the corner of the display, a cat nudges forward as if to leave a note, and then withdraws. The act is counted as speech. The log awards it a line of its own. Silence enters like a professional. Badges, clearances, keys, all present and correct. It stands in the doorway, so nothing else has to. Somewhere above, a reptile organizes its plates into patience. Somewhere below, a road continues without destination and is content to be map rather than journey. Between them, an amulet warms to the touch and remembers how to be a person without insisting on it. The terminal's phosphor throws one last, almost imperceptible reflection on the glass, the outline of a head, bending, not in prayer, not in defeat, in witness. The outline does not belong to anyone. It belongs to the act. The cursor collapses to a dot. The dot holds. Static returns as confetti for a ceremony that never had guests. Then, the room gifts itself a final sound. One heartbeat. Not a sample, not a loop. The building takes responsibility for the beat and returns to baseline. The beat is not repeated. Repetition would be indulgence. The monitor yields its light to the dark without argument. Black. A line appears, faint at first, then legible, as if written by the phosphor, remembering handwriting from a prior machine. Somewhere beneath the world, the files are still being written. The sentence does not flicker. It does not ask to be believed. It offers itself as a condition. The condition is that the world continues to keep secrets in rooms made of light and patience. That memory persists at densities which do not end buildings. That the Foundation's most difficult work is to leave the page open and walk away. The line remains a moment too long for style. The room accepts the error as a kindness. Silence again. Not empty. Kept.